I think following on from last one, just a very quick debrief, and I won't recap any of the content, but how did you guys go after that? Was there anything that stuck out, I guess, that you were thinking about post the last session? That kind of was like the pebble in the shoe after that little journey, or did you just forget about it and not think about it until tonight? That's fine as well. Okay. I said you might not remember, and that's okay too. But
Yeah, my recollection was it was almost overwhelming, the amount of information. You'd say sort of a big dump, and then I think I slept on it, and I woke up and just got on with work, and I haven't thought about it much, and then suddenly thought, oh, it must be a new version coming up, so I'll get back into it.
excellent.
I'll
Yeah,
be
that's
I'll
good.
be sort of transparent. Hello, dog.
Brilliant.
Sarah's a bit more on plugged in, so I'll let her take the floor.
I don't know where you got that impression.
Yeah. Sarah, just give us a 9-point outline of the in order of life-changing meaningfulness from last time. No.
Yeah.
Or was there anything that you heard that you hadn't heard before? Maybe that's another good way of thinking about it.
I don't know. I feel like it maybe gave a bit more detail to some things that I had thought about before, but like especially with all the different atonement theories that you went through, I found that really interesting. I think, just having that broken down a bit more, because I think I kind of understood it like, in a general sense, but like breaking it down into the detail of like each theory and kind of why it doesn't work. And I found that bit really interesting. I think, probably in general, it just sort of piqued my interest a bit more to kind of dig into the Bible a bit more. I think I don't know what else to say about it. It's not like a specific thing that has been bothering me or anything like that, but it's just more like I'm interested to learn more.
Yeah. No, that's good. That is good. It's it's a foundational one, right? So it's really a lesson that kind of gives us those it was a lesson to give us the tools to have these sort of conversations, and to that point we'll see in the coming lessons there'll be times where we're like, oh, okay, we're using these sort of tools, and then becomes apparent as to why it was important to do that. But today is quite a unique one, because this was actually quite a new concept to me when I first came across this. I hadn't I sounded quite arrogant saying that, but I actually thought, you read so much stuff that you tend to think that you've heard most of the perspectives, but this was it was really interesting. And to be honest, when I first read it, I actually was thinking, like, what's the relevance to this? Why is this a lesson? What's the point? And then as I got towards the end, I sort of started to realize and understand a bit. But it was one of those things that I went from what's the relevance to, oh, that's a huge shift. This is actually really, really important. And so I'm pretty excited to go through it. The title of it, this first lesson, is the Hapiru, which is the idea is that we want to have a bit of a look at the origins of the Hebrews. Okay, so we're going way back to the beginning. And I guess a good way to start is to have a bit of a look and ask the question, how do you understand the identity of the Hebrews? So like if you think of, when you hear the word Hebrew, so what comes to mind? Is it a race, a religion, a people, an ethnicity? What's sort of the main idea that comes to mind?
People for me.
Yep. What links those people?
Jenga.
Like the
So
Yeah.
it was a family that came out of, wasn't it? It was a
Yeah.
family that came out of into Egypt, wasn't it? They got invited into Egypt and then came out of there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
they
we see
grew,
that.
yeah, grew into a people. Well, went from a family to a people to a nation.
Yeah. So Genesis obviously talks about Abraham and, the patriarchs, the stories of the patriarchs that sort of trace back. So it's a lineage in a sense. So if we think of it in that sense, I guess the way that we typically understand the Hebrews to be, it would be a race, I guess, a particular ethnicity, a genetic ethnicity, right? Like if it comes from a single family that then comes down, that's typically how we would tend to think of the Hebrews. It's certainly how I would. It's an ethnicity. It's a race of people, right? And Genesis certainly adds that picture because it traces that back all the way through to Abraham. It's quite neat. But what's interesting is, and this is the whole point, what we're going to look at today, is it's actually far more complicated than that. When we look at the actual origins of the Hebrew people, rather than it being a pure ethnic race that has clearly come from a particular lineage, instead we see evidence of it being a particular socioeconomic class, so a group of people initially, right, that were not linked through genetics, through race, through ethnicity, but rather were linked by a circumstance. And this was a people called the Hapiru, which...
How do you spell that?
Well, it's a good question. There's a few different ways. So
Okay.
you'll see it, Hapiru, Hapiru, or sometimes Habiru,
Oh, okay.
or sometimes Apiru.
Oh, Hapiru. So silent H, no H.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So so we start to see there is a bit of a difference depending on. There's a lot of references to these people,
Right.
and they're different spellings. But I think I guess the objectives around this is recognizing that connection between this group of people that we know existed, called the Hapiru, and the Hebrews, and having a bit of a look at, well, because some scholars will disagree, and we'll discuss that, what their thoughts are around this, and not link it, and discuss also why I think it should be. Understanding Israel's mixed, diverse origins. Importantly, seeing how God's choice of the oppressed shapes the biblical story. So why does it matter? And reframing this idea of chosenness, which is a huge thing, right? And that was a key for me, this idea of a chosen people. Well, it's one thing to choose a particular ethnicity or race or lineage of people, which tends to be the idea that we have. It's like this one particular race was chosen, and then Jesus kind of opened it up to everyone else to kind of be allowed to come in. But if we change our understanding of this, if instead we see the truth of the Hebrews actually being like a dispossessed group of people, then the fact that God chose that group of people, that solidarity with the marginalised rather than with a particular ethnicity, which can affect all sorts of the way we see things and understand things today. If that's who God first showed up to, that's a big deal. So who's got a Bible? Have either of you guys got a Bible open?
Not open, but I've got it next to me.
Ooh, do you want to go to...
Do you want a youth Bible, the Wonder Bible, the Holy Bible, the Study Bible?
Whichever floats your boat, mate.
I've got a Quran, if that helps.
Quran will be helpful. Yep. Chuck that in. Do you want to go to?
Excuse me, dog.
Why don't you jump into Genesis 14, verse 13 to 16.
14. And then what was the verses?
13 to 16.
Surely. To 16. Okay. Somebody's typing really fast.
Sorry.
That's good. That's good. That's all right. It always impresses me when somebody can type that fast. There's no jealousy at all.
I might mute myself when I'm not talking.
Nah, it's all good. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm writing the stuff down. You're typing it. Luke's reading it.
That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, before you open that, before we get into Genesis, do you guys remember when we spoke about the order that the books were written in?
Alphabetically?
Absolutely, alphabetically. That's correct. Obviously, what's the first book of the Bible?
Genesis.
Genesis.
But arguably, Job was first.
There's arguments for that.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the earliest. It's certainly one of the earlier texts. What's almost indisputable, I should say, is the fact that Genesis was written and I guess finalized in the exile, Babylonian exile. It came much later. So traditionally, and I guess the Jewish tradition as well, is to the start of the story is not Genesis. The start of the story is Exodus. Now, there's a lot of evidence to say that the earliest sort of texts were actually the story of David and Solomon through Kings and Chronicles. Well, not Chronicles, sorry, but through Kings and First Samuel. But it's sort of irrelevant for this conversation whether that came first and then Exodus, or whether Exodus and then that. Either way, we know Exodus certainly came far before Genesis, right? Exodus is considered the birth of the people. This is really the start of the story. And it's important for us to understand that it's really hard for us to get our head around it, because it's the way Genesis is written is it ties everything together. It creates this prehistory that then flows into it. It makes sense that feels like the beginning, but that story actually came out. It doesn't mean that those stories aren't true. There's certainly historical truth in them, and they were crafted there for a reason. But we need to get our minds attuned to the fact that Exodus is actually the true start of the story. This is the birth of the people, the birth of the nations. And when we understand this, we realize that the true beginning of the biblical narrative is this story of liberation from oppression, right? This liberation out of Egypt. And let's see here. So now, if you've got that Bible there, Neil, would you open to Exodus?
Everything.
Exodus.
Are you on Exodus now?
Go to Exodus. Yeah, scrap what I said before.
I can't scrap anything you say. It's too valuable to my life.
Exodus 12, verse 38.
Easy. Now, what was the one you said is arguably the first written book?
The monarchy narrative. So the Solomon and David. So the Kings, Book of Kings, and First Samuel, most likely, First and Second Samuel. That's I believe, probably came before this. In fact, the Exodus story there's a lot of references between Solomon and Pharaoh and the Exodus
Right.
story. So, but they're either side, whichever one came first. Either the monarchy narratives is framing Solomon as the new Pharaoh, or they're framing Pharaoh as a picture of Solomon. So whichever, there's a lot of links there. It's a bit of a side note to this, but they're very early texts. What is almost guaranteed is these texts were certainly before Genesis. They came before that.
Yeah.
So we would expect to see references within these texts to this idea of the Hapiru, right? This idea of this dispossessed people.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to read Exodus 12, verse 38?
Surely. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle.
What stands out to you there?
Even very much.
Correct. Yeah. And the first, what's the very first thing how's it referred to them?
Mixed multitude. That was really cool.
Mixed multitude,
Yeah.
which is a really specific description
Yeah.
of these people, right? A mixed multitude.
Mm.
The reason this is really important is because, and we see this throughout. So when we see God referencing, or we see in the Bible, Hebrews being referenced,
Yep.
it's quite different in these earlier texts. You know, we see God being like a God of the Hebrews, and that's referenced a lot. In fact, let me show you that. That's
They do talk about, the God of the Hebrews. Yeah.
so if we look at here we go. So Exodus 3:18, they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us.
Yeah.
Let us now go a 3 days journey into the wilderness. Exodus 5:3, and they answered, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Exodus 7:16, say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, let my people go. Exodus 9:1, then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go. Exodus 9:13, then the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews. Again, Exodus 10:3, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews. It's referenced over and over and over again. And when we understand that, what is it why does it matter? What is it that they're referring to when it talks about the God of the Hebrews? It's not just this lineage of people. This was written well before Genesis. This is an understanding of who are these people that's referring to, because it's not just the Israelites. Why is it this reference consistently to the God of the Hebrews, God of the Hebrews? And if we look at it in the way that, okay, so maybe if we understand the Hebrews are different to just this ethnicity and is actually referring to a group of people, that opens up what we're actually looking at. So,
It's interesting, like the King James talks about a mixed multitude, which I hadn't really clicked on before. The NIV is very vague. It doesn't seem to indicate that.
yes.
I can't refer to TPT because they're not quite there yet. But the Message Bible talks about Hebrews and non-Hebrews alike set out.
Yes.
Mm.
Which, really sort of, say, depending on which version, they'd sort of pull out the fact that, it wasn't, let's say, a particular family, ethnicity, something. There was a bit of a mix.
It's weird, right? Because the way that the word is used and with the frequency and whatnot, it's being used almost as a descriptor of a group of people rather than just defining a group of people, if that makes sense. It's actually what is the purpose of the text to continually refer to someone as either a Hebrew or to God as a God of the Hebrews? It's like over and over again. And then when we look at, this idea of mixed multitude, we start to realize, there was more coming out of Egypt than what we realized. This was a different, the makeup of the people that were being liberated is very, very different to simply just this ethnic identity, this ethnic group, a particular race descended from a family that is being liberated, that we think of as the Hebrews.
Which would make sense, because you go, they'd become a slave group or group of slaves in there. So you go in and they're talking, what was it, 600,000. So you imagine that's not just them. And the Egyptians would have conquered and enslaved multiple other groups as well. So yeah, it would be really mixed, which I hadn't really thought about before. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're going to get to that. We're going to get to how this people came about, what they actually are, and because this is not just a word that I've sort of made up. There's evidence throughout that keep referring to this thing called the Hapiru, or the Apiru, in not just in the Bible, but all throughout these clay tablets and things from this period of time. And when it explains the type of people that they were, we start to see a lot of the similarities, and these references start to make a lot more sense. Even in Genesis, back to that Genesis 14:13-16, which I can read for you if you like.
I just read verse 37 in the King James. It says, "And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children, and a mixed multitude went up with them also."
Yes, there you go.
So it was that core group, but there's a heap of others. Yeah,
correct.
It really gets quite specific about it.
And then even when it starts talking about the group that grumbled, right, which is they grumble about leaving all the food in Egypt. Exodus 3:7-9 says, in Numbers 11:4, the camp followers with them had a strong craving, and the Israelites also wept again and said, "If only we had meat to eat." So you got two groups of people there: the camp followers with them, and the Israelites. Right?
I've never noticed this before.
No. I mean, that's the goal. That's the plan.
Same. Yeah, that's cool. You might be onto something here, Luke. I'm liking it.
Even when we look at Genesis, right, when we do see, even though this was written later, Genesis 14:13-16. Do you have that open there, Neil?
"And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother had taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them into Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Habath, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot, and his goods, and the woman also, and the people."
That's it. So
imagine having 318 people in your household that you could arm up as professional soldiers and rout a king.
Well, and that's it. And this picture of someone, and I think it's really telling that that's a picture. Yeah, that's effectively a description of a warlord, right? Because this is not someone who's representative in an army of a nation state or a particular city. This is someone who literally loses his nephew, arms up a bunch of people, and says, "We're going to go take it back, and we're also going to get some interest. We're going to get the women, and we're going to get the goods, and we're going to destroy them and take it back." It's like a mercenary gang. It's what you would see from a warlord. That's no disrespect to Abram. This was the time. Yeah, this was the world that they lived in. But that's a picture of a type of activity, a type of behavior that is representative of what we are going to see in the Hapiru, this group of people. And it's so interesting that when describing that, what do they call him? Abram, the Hebrew.
Yeah.
You know, it's a descriptor. It's not a racial identification. It's a descriptor of the class of people that he belongs to, right? That then aligns with the story that it's telling. So does that make sense? So we'll get to, actually, no, we'll do it now. The obvious question with this then is why do we have these stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these patriarchal narratives? So why would, and I'll throw this open to you guys, why do you think if the Hapiru, this mixed group of people, dispossessed people, if the origin of the Hebrews was actually this group of people that were united not necessarily by their blood or their ethnicity, but instead by their shared status, their shared socioeconomic status as a group of dispossessed people. Why? What do we do with the patriarchal narratives? What do we do with these stories that we find in Genesis about a direct lineage through to someone like Abraham? You know, that kind of tidies things up. Why do you think that would be the case?
Because it's all through the book, plural, where they're always going back and recounting their lineage, isn't it? Like it's where they've come from, where their family ties are. Doesn't matter who it is. It's a big part of where you've come from.
It is. And what I want to clarify here as well, I'm certainly not saying there was no Abraham, there's no Isaac and Jacob. This was a narrative made up to cover up the true origins. That's not what I'm saying at all. I believe these were figures that existed in some form or fashion. You know, they were legends and stories and historical lineage that were passed down through these groups of people, right? Through these people who were identified and certainly who came to identify themselves in solidarity, you know, once we come to the exile in Babylon. They were traditions. So I think these people absolutely existed. This is not about saying that they didn't exist. But the question is, why do we have them, and why do we have this neat little bow tied up? And the clue is, when was Genesis written? I touched on it last week. I'll forgive you if you don't remember. It was during like a really major point in time, like a crazy important historical moment. Tash yelled out the exile. You get bonus points, Tash. Well done.
Yeah, because I think you even said it earlier, the Babylonian exile or something was
correct.
Yeah.
Babylonian exile. So, and to recap, this is a group of people who had come together from the north and from the south, right? The northern monarchy, the southern monarchy, the tribes had split, all of that sort of stuff, right? And then all of a sudden they find themselves collectively exiled into Babylon. And they're under oppression. They don't have a particularly bad life in Babylon. They're actually treated reasonably well, but they had no temple. Jerusalem was burnt to the ground. They had no monarchy. There was no government. Everything that told them about who they were as a people, their identity, was wrapped up in the temple and was wrapped up in their monarchy, right? And in their land. It was all about the land. It was the promised land that they were in, right? This was Jerusalem. And yet it's now all gone, and they're in Babylon. with a whole bunch of other people as well, right? And with the Babylonians. It was a huge crisis of identity, like a massive existential crisis of we are either going to be absorbed into the surrounding people and lose everything who we are, who we understand God to be, our own identity, or we need to do something so that that doesn't happen, so that our kids know who our God is, so that we don't just all of a sudden become Babylonians effectively. How do we stand different? But if we don't have all of the things that we typically relied on that actually gave us our identity, how are we going to go about doing that? And the answer was, well, let's get together. Let's have a look at all of our traditions, all of our legends, all of our stories, our the things that have been passed down through generations and generations from the north and from the south, and let's compile them. Let's get them into some sort of text, right? Let's have something that we can gather around so that we don't forget, that we can teach our kids from, something that actually cements a bit of our identity. And that's where Genesis was compiled and finalized, along with many, many other books of the Bible. But in particular, what we're talking about, Genesis, is the big one. So they're taking stories that absolutely could be true, that absolutely carry a deep meaning about who they are and about who God is, and they bring them together, which is why we have two creation stories, because you got one from the north and one sort of from the south. You know, we had in the north, they had the legends of Abraham. In the south, it was Isaac and Jacob. And so all of a sudden it starts to come together and we get a cohesive narrative, right? Now, if they're facing a crisis of identity and they're wanting to really double down on a cohesive unification of who they are as a people, it makes total sense to tidy up and align these stories so that there is a direct lineage. So God chooses Abraham, and then it just flows down through there to them, right? It also means that their enemies around them, they remove any connection with them. You know, the Canaanites are obvious, regular bad guys in the scriptures with that. But the reality is there was a lot of Canaanites in that mixed multitude. You know, they have a Canaanite background. Abraham was from Ur, which was a Canaanite city. Like it's so what it does is it just kind of neatens things, and it provides them a solid, I guess, identity. It's a metaphor of a family. It comes to express and underline the new style of community and identity that God is seeking to create. But the biological meaning is not the source of that biblical term Hebrew. It's not a race. It's not a biological term, and it's the patriarchs were real figures, but they were also symbols of insecurity and marginalisation. And we see echoes of this in the text as well, where we realise, they're acting out of desperation, which reflects this social class that was dispossessed, that had no power. You look at the times when Abraham tries to give his wife over and say that his wife's his sister, you know, and I think Isaac does that as well. Yeah, and they happen several times, and it's a really, really weird thing. It's like, no, this is my sister, but when we look at it and we go, well, actually, they're just trying to survive. These are acts of pure desperation because they actually don't have any power or social standing. It's seen in a new light, you know. Again, they're little echoes of the fact that the origins of that insecure group of people are there. You know, there's echoes in the text. So,
sorry, I was going to go and grab some dinner and I'll come back, but I'll be muted, or be offline or muted or something.
No worries. That's all right. So, Sarah, just a question on that. So, what difference do you think it makes to see Abraham not just as a great ancestor, but as part of a struggling, marginalised class? Because I think the picture we often get of Abraham is he was quite powerful. Like
it's super interesting, I think, because
and he was clearly wealthy. Don't get me wrong.
yeah, I think I always saw him as like a favored, someone who was like favored and like like you said, had a lot of power. It's it kind of turns the whole thing on its head, doesn't it? When you think about him actually being part of a marginalised people, it's like puts everything in a different light.
Yeah,
Wow.
it does. We then see some of his actions as, I guess, someone who had no groundings, so no, I guess, power other than his own. Obviously, clearly he had wealth and he was a bit of a warlord, had his own band of sort of warriors with him in a caravan of goods and people and whatnot, but they weren't tethered to anything bigger than themselves necessarily. So you're still in a fight for survival. You're still displaced, which certainly affects things. And what about the idea of Exodus being the starting point of the biblical story? How do you think that changes how we read the Bible? So if we think of God being the first time God comes onto the scene is in this act of liberation of a dispossessed,
It
marginalized.
really says something about what is most important to God,
Yes.
like what He's choosing to focus on as the beginning of the story, or the point of the story.
100%.
Yeah. Wow.
It's really good. That's huge. Because if the first time we see God and who God chooses to claim as his own, the shift from that being either God has chosen a particular ethnicity or racial pure line, versus God chooses the rich and the powerful, which was the traditional understanding of how the gods would operate, versus God comes on the scene, chooses as his own the lowest of the low, dispossessed, marginalized people. And the next section, we're going to go into what that looked like, the Hapiru. But the fact that that's who God chose, and then his first act was to make them his people and then to liberate them from oppression. Yeah, that sets the picture of God very, very differently. This is not a God necessarily that Jesus has to come and say, actually, God's like this. This is a God who is like this from the very beginning.
Yeah, wow.
It's a bit of a game changer because I think I've always thought of it as you say, a patriarch. It's like he chose Luke, and everything's flowed out from Luke and Tash. You know, they're the chosen people. But now you're saying, it's not that at all.
Yeah, it is huge. It's a massive game changer. And so let's look at this group of people called the Hapiru, because then this is going to start to click in and make a bit more sense. So there did exist throughout the ancient Near East a group known as the Hapiru, and this name, the reason we know this name is it's recorded in clay tablets and stone inscriptions over the course of roughly about 1,000 years, spanning in the second millennium BCE, right? So 2000 to 1000 sort of BCE. Here's a quote from Carol Bedmount. It said, the Hapiru are a loosely defined inferior social class composed of shifting and shifty population elements without secure ties to settled communities. They are referred to as outlaws, or those that are outside the law, mercenaries and slaves in ancient texts. So several of these ancient texts will refer to them either as outlaws, mercenaries, slaves. This is a description of the context in which like the Hapiru actually arose. Because we've got to understand, well, how did these people come about? The ancient Near East around this time was an absolute hotbed of war and conflict. So if you have a picture, we've got Egypt, and then we've got Mesopotamia and the various empires that came through that. And then all in the middle between Egypt and these other warring empires up the top was this desert, which was the wilderness where they wandered, and this nice little fertile bit. And this is where there were these little city-states. So these little places would open up. You can imagine between these warring things. So the great kingdom of Egypt down the bottom, and then up the top, you've got Mesopotamia and all of these other things just in this Middle Eastern area. In between these two was just a constantly war-torn zone of conflict. Think of parts of Africa where there's just constant civil war, there is constant upheaval, there are villages that are being taken over and burnt, allegiances are being switched. Over this 1,000 years, roughly, there was an incredible amount of turmoil. And so basically what these big empires would do, whether it was Egypt or whether it was the Assyrians or Mesopotamia or any of these other ones, they would try and take over these little cities to get a little bit closer, to gain a bit of ground. And the cities would either become vassal states of them, or they would try to resist. Either way, people were killed, people were dispossessed, people lost their homes. If their town or their city actually did say, okay, we're gonna come under you, then they would then be taxed exorbitantly. So obviously the Assyrians come in and they're now in charge. They've taken over this city. They've taken it either from the Egyptians, or in order to get closer to the Egyptian empire, they're going to try and extract as much. They don't care about the people. So what happens is people they'll flee, or they lose everything. They lose their farms, they lose their houses, they lose everything. They've got nothing. So they have to sell themselves into slavery, or they have to become mercenaries, or they have to join a bloke called Abram's traveling caravan, and when he loses his nephew and wants to go collect him, well, I'm going to take up arms and join him and go do that, because they have nothing else to do, nowhere else to go. So you can see why they start to get this reputation as outlaws, as a shifty sort of element of society. Can you think of any common, not necessarily the law side of things, but dispossessed? Can you think of any sort of common analogies to people today that either would have a low elements of society, have a low opinion of them, they find themselves in a similar sort of situation?
Well, as a direct comparison, probably like asylum seekers and refugees, of just stateless people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Identical example.
Mm.
People fleeing their home, have nothing, seeking asylum. People that find themselves not like gypsies, groups of people that they end up with this negative reputation, homeless, people caught in these in between. Look at Gaza, there's disputes, and they end up, or even in India, it's not a perfect example, but the untouchables in India, there's a low social caste.
Yeah.
They're despised almost. Right? So what we have developing is in this fluid, crazy area of the world during this time, you've still got a bit of a hierarchy. You've still got kings and leaders and emperors up the top. Then you've got, I guess, that's that elite class. You've then got in the middle peasants, so farmers, people that were able to maintain their land, maintain their position, either had the money to pay when they were being extorted or bent the knee to the right people, whatever it was. But they're that middle ground. And then at the very, very bottom, you have what was known as the Hapiru, right? So this dispossessed people. And This is a war-torn countryside. It's an imperial nation, land grabbing, throwing around its weight, absorbing small city-states, exacting tribute. The constant warfare just produces displaced people, refugees, outlaws. They end up becoming slaves, debt servants. They're treated as less than human, or they become mercenaries, as I said. Now, what do you think people's understanding of when they looked at this group of people and they thought about how they got there? Do you think that people looked at them and had compassion or thought, oh, that's unfortunate? Or what do you reckon the common view was about why they were in that position? And what did they think what did God have to do with that? Right. What did they think God had to do with them being in that position? They deserved it.
I was going to say, sort of, if you sort of think of India, and the whole those sort of karma type things, or the reincarnation, that like it's a gradual improvement. If you've done something wrong, then you deserve that, to be outcast. You deserve to be a slave. You deserve to be a Hapiru in this case. Yeah. Interesting.
That's right. I mean, their understanding of God, or the gods, was God blesses, right?
Yeah.
If you're on top, God's on your side. That's why they thought the people at the top were effectively gods, certainly had the favor of the gods. And the inverse was also true in their mind. Well, if you're the Hapiru, well, you must have done something to deserve it. The gods are punishing you for some reason, right? You're in that position for a reason. And it's either because you did some infraction that you'd committed, some sort of sin against the gods, or they would just think, well, you know what, whoever your gods are, they're just not strong enough. They were beaten by their gods. Like obviously your God is weak because look at the situation you're in is evident of that. So that's a pretty it's a pretty rough situation to be in. So the stronger the gods you have, the stronger your nation. So all of a sudden you've got this group of ethnically diverse people, because remember, this is a birth of civilization. This is a very ethnically diverse area and a huge area. And there's displaced people from all over this entire place. And they all are forming part of this. It's not like they're coming together, and forming a coalition. That's not what it was like, right? They were still in their own areas. It was all displaced and everywhere, but they came under a common term. Their socioeconomic class, their descriptor was the Hapiru. These people are seen in socioeconomic terms as the absolute lowest of the low. So among this group, they start to form a bit of an identity. We find ourselves in Egypt. This is a great multitude. There is and this is, I never quite understood why. How like after the Joseph story, where Joseph rises up and he's, dominating in Egypt and everything is all good and reconciles with his family. And then it just goes like, and so, a couple of 100 years later, they're all still in Egypt and then they're in slavery, right? Because they'd gotten too numerous. I always thought, like, why were they still there? Or surely you'd start to see some of the warning signs. Things mustn't have been, wouldn't you not return to your ancestral homelands? Wouldn't you go back, to where you were originally from? But this makes sense. They couldn't. Number one, because there wasn't one particular ancestral homeland for them to go home to. Number two, because they were still a low socioeconomic class. They didn't have the means to disperse. They were likely in some form of servitude or some form of, there was things that were keeping this class, this group of people in service to Egypt well before we get this idea of them. Okay, so now they're full-on slaves. Right? There's a reason that they were still there. This group.
But
and then we hit.
Sorry, because wasn't there something in there that talks about just tell the pharaoh that you're a shepherd, because the shepherd are a lowly class, so that they'll get good crops. Well, sorry, good pastures so that they can produce for the country, but they'll be left alone in there because they're just shepherds. We don't associate with them. So I suppose their identity was sown from that place already, that they saw themselves as they were happy to be a second-class citizen already.
Absolutely. And you look at that, the proceeds of them, the work that they were doing as shepherds were to go back to the empire anyway. There was a form of tribute, of taxation. So they're stuck in this. They're slaves by another name at that stage anyway. So this is a what do you call it? A serious sort of situation. And this is where we come to the mixed multitude went up with them. This is where we find ourselves. Right? So this group, this mixed multitude. And all of a sudden this idea of mixed multitude starts to make sense. All of a sudden, when it starts talking about the God of the Hebrews, well, if we understand Hebrew, Hapiru, to be referring to this group of people, it's a bold statement the text is making. That all of a sudden, not only does God not want to have anything to do with the rich and powerful, which is what was expected, but instead this God is choosing this group of people, this despised group of people, dispossessed, ethnically diverse, without home, on the margins, slaves, outlaws, mercenaries, thugs, despised. This is his group of people. This is who God chooses, to be God of the Hebrews, right? And this is why it makes sense now when we see Abram the Hebrew then acts in a very Hapiru way. We see that with David as well. I think it's where is it? First Samuel.
He runs, hides, lives in caves, becomes a mercenary.
Yeah.
Other people's battles. Yeah. 1
Samuel 22, 1-2. David left there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, where his brothers and all his father's house heard of it. They went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Those who were with him numbered about 400. Again, this is a picture of a warlord leading a group of Hapiru, right? Those that were in distress, in debt, discontented, and they gathered to him. He is doing that. Even 1 Samuel 29, 1-5. Now the Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, while the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" The commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back, so that he may return to the place that you have assigned to him. He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in battle." Because David has a bunch of Hapiru with him, and he is fighting for the Philistines. Even though they know that he is Saul's right-hand man, he's still acting as a mercenary for the highest bidder. And they're going, "No, send him back. We can't trust him, because what if him and his mates turn around and change their mind?" This again is a picture of this group of people. So once we see this, we start to see evidence of it over and over and over again, right?
So what was that first verse, the first verses you read out?
That was 1 Samuel 22, 1-2. And then 1 Samuel 29, 1-5.
1-5?
Yep.
Chills.
Yeah, so it's crazy. So now you mentioned earlier the mixed multitude. That's kind of where we're up to, right? So we've got this mixed multitude. So the Exodus community was never racially pure. They were diverse. They were bound. What bound them was not their ethnicity. It was a shared oppression and their liberation. Now, later texts, Nehemiah and Numbers, start to reflect later tensions around racial purity, showing shifts in theology. So we see that in Nehemiah. It says, when the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. They basically forced a lot of them to get divorced, and they start to go through all of these racial purity to separate out to try to cut ties, right, with the nations around them and who they consider pure and impure. But you can't do that because this whole group is this motley crew originally. Now, it's important to say we're talking about origins here. So clearly the Hebrews do develop into a much more cohesive unit, a much more identifiable ethnicity. Clearly today there is such an ethnicity as Hebrew, as Jewish. It did develop into that. So we're not talking about the idea and notion of it today, but the origins is really, really important, because the origins is what God chose. And that speaks volumes about the type of God that we're talking about. Yeah? So we see this diverse crowd that's actually leaving Egypt. So it's the actual story of Exodus that makes them a people, not strict genetic descent. I think that's a really key thing that we understand before moving on. It's the story that binds them. It's that liberation from oppression that binds them. It's their chosenness in God because of their social status that unified them as a people, not a genetic racial descent. If we look at the biblical, oh no, so I've done that. Okay.
And what's Tash's take on this?
She's, I'll hear all about it afterwards. Don't worry. It'll be brutal. I'll spare you the recap.
Nah, I think she often brings some interesting insights because she gets to process it a bit more. So be interesting to hear at some stage.
That's actually got to chime in. I think she's ignoring me. She says she'll stop multitasking with her admin.
She's probably watching Gogglebox like my wife.
So that then brings us back to Yahweh being called the God of the Hebrews in all of those moments I mentioned earlier through Exodus. Yeah, this insistent designation, it makes so much more sense in this context now that we understand it's referring to a God who has taken the side of an oppressed group rather than the God of an arbitrary ethnic tribe. Right? That's why it's like God, the Lord, God of the Hebrews, God of the Hebrews. It's like just like this is who it is. Now, particularly when we look at the literal and the flat reading and the inerrant reading of the text, this presents difficulties when you start to question the origins that, and the role that the patriarchs might have had. So clearly there's going to be pushback on this. And so one common pushback, it is pretty widely accepted, but it's important to present both sides. One side that has been presented is that the Habiru or the Hapiru have nothing to do with actually the origins of the Hebrews, and instead the name Hebrew comes from Eber in Genesis 10:25, which is the word Eber, E-B-E-R, has similarities, certainly linguistically, to the word for Hebrew in Hebrew, which is every. But it presents its own sort of set of questions. If the person of Eber, right, in Genesis, do you have that there? Genesis 10:25, Neil?
Yes, indeed.
What's it say?
And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan.
Yeah.
Literally, no. That's sorry, there's a little thing, literally division. So yeah, it must be talking about divided. Doesn't tell you what Joktan stands for.
So because this is part of the lineage, I guess, right? This is giving us like part of the lineage. That's where it's been argued that, well, in order to reconcile it and to make it all make sense, the word Hebrew, the closest linguistically is this name Eber. It must have come from that. So that's where we get the word Hebrews from, right? Which then aligns with the neat narrative of it coming from a single ethnic origin.
Right.
What's the obvious question or issue with potentially that, right? If we disregard linguistically that, I guess you could make it work, which you can also make Habiru work as well. Who is Eber?
Yeah.
Like to name an entire lineage of, group of people after someone, there should be something in the text to indicate why, right? You'd think there would be some sort of explanation. There would be some sort of role that Eber would play that would, why would they choose him as the namesake for all of this? There's nothing in the text or extemporaneously that suggests any connection whatsoever to this, other than the fact that you could kind of linguistically make it work. You could say that it evolved from the name Eber. But it's a pretty weak argument. If
it's only mentioned once, it's like, why would you create this entire thing from this one?
That's right. And we hear of, this is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Did the Exodus Hebrews then consist of descendants of Peleg and Joktan as well as Abraham and Jacob? Why aren't there any patriarchal stories related to Eber or his sons? The descent from this figure is completely insignificant.
It occurs pretty late in the generations.
Correct.
You got these are the generations of the sons of Noah, and then you go down, and it's like you're almost near the end, and they go, Eber. I don't know.
That's right.
Makes no sense to me.
It doesn't. So I think, for me, and obviously Habiru, Hebrew, it makes a lot of sense. But even without that, it works historically. This is that historical critical lens. We know this was happening around that same time. There's evidence throughout the text with mixed multitude, with differentiating between Israel and others, and it's clear there was a diverse group here. Not to mention the fact that we see Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these guys, David, acting like this, right? These stories are maintained because they preserve the memory of the insecurity of these people. They've got a sociological identity and desperation of the Hapiru. So why is this important, right? I guess before we move on to that, how do you think this challenges our ideas of pure identity or belonging? Yeah. It certainly reframes, I think, what's happening in Gaza with Israel and the idea of what side God is on, who's God's chosen ethnicity or people or the land. And but it's not just that. Yeah, we see we don't like to say it because obviously Jesus dismantles it, but there is still very much a sense of in and out, belonging and unbelonging, God's chosen, God's not unchosen, elect, unelect. There is an identity, a pure identity, an impure identity that we carry with us even in Pentecostal, evangelical, Protestant spaces.
Yeah, I was going to say we pretend that we're above all that sort of stuff, but the way we behave is very much underpins a lot of things.
Yeah. And so much of that can be traced back to this idea of God choosing a singular family. And this blows that up. So Exodus 3:7-9, one of my favorite verses. Let me see. I think it's one of my favorite verses. Then the Lord said, I've observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. And I've come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Now, this is Exodus 3, right? And again, we now know that this is the first story. This is we begin the Bible with this now. This is our jumping point, our launch pad when it comes to looking at the Bible, this story. This is a God who hears the cry of the oppressed. Again, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Hebrews. So what's the shift? Well, in contrast to ancient gods, the Egyptian gods in particular, who sided with kings because that made sense. If you were in a position of power, if you could do the oppressing, happy days. That means that God is on your side because you're in power. Nothing happens without God's say-so. Therefore, God must be endorsing what you're doing. And out of nowhere comes this idea of a God who actually is not for that, but rather hears the cry of the oppressed, not of a chosen genetic, particular racial pure family, but instead of an entire group of dispossessed people. And not just a group of dispossessed people, the lowest of the low. Despised, criminals, outlaws, outcasts, slaves, mercenaries, homeless, stateless. This is what Anthony Bartlett, who's the author of the book, calls a semiotic shift. You might hear that word a few times as we go through this. All it means is that's a word used to describe a shift in understanding who God is, right? Something that actually moves us from here to here, which is what this whole thing is about, which is what we're going to be doing over the course of this. But it's multiple little semiotic shifts that move us forward. It's not always just one big thing. This is a huge one, and this is right at the very beginning. It's a radical shift. Yahweh reveals himself on the side of slaves and refugees. Now, if we look at Exodus as the starting point, this is the first story. This sets the trajectory of the entire Bible. No longer is it the Garden of Eden and original sin and all of these different ideas of that sort of stuff, right? All of a sudden now the launching pad is this liberation. This sets the trajectory of the entire Bible from a violent God of empire who's on the side of the powerful to a non-violent God on the side of the marginalized and the oppressed, which sounds an awful lot like Jesus.
Hmm.
But this shows us this isn't Jesus coming on the scene and radically doing something different to what God's ever done before. This was the first thing God did. This is Jesus acting the way God has always acted. And this is the lens that we have to see this through. The next lesson, we are going to go into the mechanics of the Exodus, right? So we're going to tackle the tough stuff, the death of the firstborn, the plagues. I talk all the stuff about a non-violent God, and yet if God's liberating the people out of Egypt by killing the Egyptian firstborns, then we've got a real problem, right? But that's the next lesson's issue that we're going to be looking at, part of it. But just know this is a huge thing. So what do you think that reveals about God's character? And how might this shape how we think about who God speaks to today? Who are God's chosen people today?
Ooh. Who is he talking to?
So I think if we look at some implications around this, right? Hebrew began as a socioeconomic label, the Hapiru. That was its origins. That's sort of how it began. But over time, it actually does change and develop into a distinct ethnicity and a national identity, right? Very similar to how if your last name is Smith, that doesn't mean you're a blacksmith anymore, right? Once upon a time, it did. Or if your last name is Baker, you don't have to be a baker. Once upon a time, you did. That's the origins of it. Now it's just the last name. Things change. They shift over time. So there has been a shift of identity when we look at the word Hebrew. It doesn't change how we understand Hebrews today, but it absolutely should change how we look at Hebrews in the Old Testament. Chosenness is about solidarity with the marginalized and not superiority. It is not being chosen for some reason over and above someone else, right, which is superiority, elitism, which that's what God did. Then we have to we have to deal with that. We have to go, okay, well, I guess, how do we understand this? But if it's not what God did, it changes our understanding of chosenness to all of a sudden now being about solidarity with the marginalized, with the dispossessed. So, and it affects God's covenant. We talk a lot about covenants and things like that. We're big on that in our sort of, theological world. God's covenant community is defined by shared experience of oppression and liberation and not by race or lineage. So it's a covenant with a type of people, a people who are experiencing something as opposed to a race of people or a ethnicity of people, if that makes sense, which is huge, right? That's massive. And Jesus' gospel continues. It's good news to the poor, freedom for the captives. It's a big deal. So let me think. I want to shift gears for a second. We'll go into a bit of so we're good for time. So we can go into a bit of a discussion around it in a sec. Before that, I wanted to talk about some relevance to how this affects us in particular our background. So like literally us, and but before that, is there any thoughts before I move on from that bit?
Oh, I just find the whole thing quite mind-blowing, really. I think I'm still, like, processing it. But, like, sorry if I'm not very forthcoming with my
No, not at all.
my comments. But yeah, it's just like completely turned the whole thing upside down, and it explains a lot of like, yeah. I guess that question has never been answered for me before. Of like, um why were the Hebrew people so special, and why were they the chosen people? And like, if God loves all of us equally, then why was it like this? And like, that's never been sort of satisfactorily explained before. And it's one of those things that I've kind of just been like, oh, that's in the too hard basket. I'll just like
Yes.
look at that later. But it makes so much more sense now. Yes,
That's awesome.
It's really big. Yeah.
And it doesn't take away from the Hebrews being a chosen people, from this group of people, the significance of their history, the significance of them being the bearers and the carriers of this incredible revelation of God that we see all through the scripture. So this in no way diminishes the history of the Hebrew people. But instead, I think it enhances it, because we like you said, we realize this is not some and I kind of came to the conclusion this is like an arbitrary choice. It was like, well, someone had to be the people, right?
Yeah.
May as well be this guy out of Ur in and this guy called Abraham, and we'll just kick it off with him and see what happens. Like that was the best I could come up with. But this all of a sudden, it's so fitting, and it makes so much more sense with the character of God.
Yeah.
And again, I want to reiterate, this is not saying Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't exist, and the Exodus didn't happen the way we are told it is, and we have to throw all this out. It's like, no. We don't have to do any of that. This is not discrediting any of those sort of things. It's simply just saying that this people that were in lineage through from the great patriarchs, it wasn't just this one family. They were in amongst other people that shared the same situation that they did. And yet God was for all of them. And then this whole group of people that were very ethnically diverse and distinct, but in a shared experience, coalesced and found themselves as a identity of people, right? And wrote Genesis and tidied it up a little bit to make the story, the story helps solidify their identity, but that understanding of the Hapiru being there, that's like the glue that holds the story together. That they don't contradict with one another. It's just another layer to it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What about you, Neil? Any thoughts?
I was about to say, very much the same. It's like, it just sort of turns everything upside down and sort of breaks the puzzle. Now it's a matter of going, okay, well, let's reframe it. It's funny that I met up, sort of unrelated, but I met with a guy yesterday at a school, and he was talking about they had some CCTV in the school, and a contractor had come on site, and they could see him on there, and you could see him. And he said he hopped out of the car and he looked around, and then he went down the back and picked up something that was orange in color, brought it back, popped it into the car, had a bit of a look around, and disappeared. And when they went and checked later, there was a big lithium battery had gone missing. And Philip was saying, like, as you watched it, you could see this guy looked like he was looking around. Okay, nobody's here. Goes down, grabs this thing, sort of it's sort of a bit occluded through the bush, but you could see him with something in his arm that had some sort of potentially orange look, and put it in his car and sort of looked around and then disappeared. And so they spoke to the guy's boss, and the boss said, "Look, no, I sent him down there to get some replacement roof tiles, which are also orange."
Oh,
And so so Phil said he actually sat down again and watched the video with him, and you could see he just looked around because he's going, not where's the cameras, is anybody looking, it's where do I find this trailer that's got the tiles on it that I need?
yeah.
So suddenly it's gone from somebody's doing something suspicious to how do I find something? And then he'd gone down there and picked it up and brought it back, and he didn't. And then it reframed the way he sat back at the car going, he wasn't looking around. Has anyone seen me? Am I safe to go?
Yes.
The whole thing was framed. And the owner of the company that sent him there said, "Look, I'm just going to buy you a replacement battery." And they go, "Look, there's no issue. There's no issue." And the guy just bought one anyway. Just sort of said, "Look, just so there's nothing untoward about it." But it was that whole, when you first looked at it, it was completely suspicious. It made sense in that regard. But as soon as you reframe it and understand, look, it just shifts the whole game, and you go, how did we miss it? But yeah, it's that perception thing.
Totally.
It's the whole thing. Yeah. And I think that's sort of where, for me, that's where I'm sitting with this. It's like, okay, it was a family. It came out of that. No idea why he picked that family. Why didn't he pick Sarah's family instead of Luke's family? But he did. But now it's a ragtag bunch of people that have come together and coalesced into some sort of a group. And yeah,
Totally.
it's essentially the same story, but it just.
It is. It's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's that the new eyes. It's the shift in perspective, right?
Yeah.
It's the same story.
Yeah.
It's just read in a new way. And it starts to, this is what I mean by this stuff gives color to the story. We read stories that we've read a million times. We read them afresh. We see new things. Yeah. The story of Hagar. And again, Genesis is not about rewriting history at all. It's not doing anything wrong with the patriarch narratives and stuff. It's beautiful. It's unifying and this identity of a people, tracing it back through in the lead up to the Exodus, right? But there are echoes of the character of God throughout all of Genesis that reflect the same thing. When you've got Abraham and Sarah that kick out Hagar and Ishmael. Is it Ishmael? I think so. When they kick him out because Sarah gets jealous about Abraham with Hagar, right? And it's like this is all of a sudden now the camera zooms out into the wilderness where Hagar is. And that's where God is. And God's speaking to her and helping her and rescuing her. It's like God's not in the camp with Abraham and Sarah. It's like he's out with the one who's just been kicked out of home.
Sheep that was lost.
The sheep that was lost. That's right. Yeah. And then the very first person to ever name God in Scripture is Hagar, the God who sees me.
Right.
Yeah, the God who sees, which is a beautiful picture to the. I mean, this is a class of people that nobody saw. They were despised, but they were ignored. It's like the homeless. You step over them and you keep walking, and they're almost invisible. All of a sudden now this is a God who not only is not for the rulers and the oppressors, but the God who sees those who no one else does and is for them. The God of the Hebrews, the God of the Hebrews. It's beautiful. It colors everything in a whole new way. But I'd given some thought to how does this apply to us, particularly from our background, our church background and modern day things. Because this is not just a historical correction, right? It's actually, this has direct implications. And so I think a couple of points that I'll go through. One, misunderstanding Hebrews as a race, it creates a false story. Right? If we think and we've spoken a bit about this, if we think of the Hebrews as a pure race chosen by God, we start to feed a narrative that God privileges certain bloodlines or nations or ethnic identities. Right? That misreading alone starts to legitimize, whether we realize it or not, exclusivist politics, We are God's people. They're not God's people. You know, manifest destiny. God's given this country over to us, right? No matter how many Indians we kill to get it. Like all of this sort of stuff where we start to badge God is for us and not for them. It feeds into that. It's the same instincts behind Christian nationalism in the US and increasingly here, anti-immigration rhetoric in churches that start to baptize border security as God's will. This is not anything to do with saying that there's not a complexity with border security and with immigration and things like that. There absolutely is, but to take it to the point where we say no, it's, again, we're baptizing, border security as God's will, alligator Alcatraz, or all of these sorts of things that we start to badge with God stem from an us versus them and a God's chosen versus, this is God's country and this is rah, rah, rah. So if you're a Muslim, you're not welcome because actually this is a Christian ethic that is here. It's like, well, actually, if that Muslim is a refugee who's been dispossessed and is, maybe that's God's chosen, if we look at it from this understanding. So the idea that Christianity is our culture to defend rather than God's justice breaking down walls. So misreading the Hebrews as a race, it actually trains us to see faith as inheritance and entitlement rather than calling and liberation, which is a huge thing. The second point is the real story is that God starts with the oppressed and not with the powerful. So with the Hapiru, the landless, stateless, socially despised, ethnically mixed, God chooses them not because of who they were, but actually because of where they were. They were on the underside of history. It wasn't anything to do with their particular, who they were as people. It was more to do with the situation that they were in, how they were being treated. It was not the way the world is supposed to work. So this demolishes really any idea that God is invested or interested in sort of racial purity or national identity or cultural dominance at all. It's the opposite. God's people are those who are called out of oppression and into justice, which is the story that we're working on. This is a story that by definition welcomes the outsider. Christianity is not about defending our way of life. It's about joining the God who sides with the powerless and looking for opportunities in order to do that. So I guess for a white evangelical Pentecostal Christian background, why is this relevant for us? I didn't personally, but I know many of us did in these backgrounds grow up with an Israel-obsessed, end times, chosen nation theology, right? That's a huge part of it. I know that was part of Tasha's upbringing. We still see it all the time today. Israel. Well, the reason we're so focused on Israel is because we think that there is a racial predilection of God's chosenness for this particular nation that gives them license effectively to do whatever, right? So, and it all is linked to end times and this chosen nation stuff. So it subtly shapes how Christians see themselves as part of a favored people. But what if we saw ourselves as part of a mixed multitude? That changes things, right? Instead, the opposite is Christian nationalism is fueled. So God blesses our nation. We are chosen. Anti-immigration stances, they don't belong to us, or they'll dilute our Christian way of life or culture, or exclusivist church culture, insiders versus outsiders. But if the Hebrews weren't a race, then God's people were never defined by ethnicity or borders, which is really key. Instead, God's people are those who cry out under oppression and are willing to follow God into liberation. And we see this with Jesus. He comes in and he's not interested in the right people at all. In fact, he just seeks out the Hapiru of his time. So the church's identity has to be multi-ethnic. It's got to be justice-oriented, migrant welcoming. Otherwise, we start to betray our own origins. And again, that's not ignoring complexity around issues. It's simply saying that we need to, if we know where we've come from, then we have a better understanding of where we should be going. and what that should look like, if that makes sense. How does this reframe Christian identity today? Well, if God never tied his people to a race or a nation, then any claim that Christianity is tied to a race or a nation is idolatry. That's key. When we understand that the Exodus itself began as a refugee caravan, a mixed multitude that went up with them, well, if we are Christian, it means that we actually belong to a migrant story. Jesus himself was a dispossessed migrant. He was driven from his homeland from King Herod, and had to take refuge. He was a refugee, had to take refuge in a neighboring city, and he was himself a migrant story. So if we oppose the refugee, we start to oppose our own spiritual ancestors. And I don't necessarily just mean refugee from a political sense. I just mean refugee in the human sense, right? Those who are dispossessed, those who don't have, I guess, a place to call home, either spiritually or socially or nationally. When it comes to mission and evangelism, instead of inviting people into a bounded club, we invite them into a movement of justice that started with the dispossessed, which is far more compelling, I think, especially in today's sort of climate. The real test of faithfulness isn't how pure we keep our boundaries, but whether we embody God's justice, hospitality, and solidarity with the marginalised. I think going forward, that's going to be the real marker as to, are we actually following Jesus or not? It becomes less about, do we look the part, and more about, are we embodying what he embodied, what God embodies? If is what's important to God important to us, right? Basically, if we think Hebrews equal a race, we're going to build walls. If we think Hebrews equal Hapiru, we're going to build tables. We see the world differently. We see people differently. And we see who the chosen of God very, very differently. The first leads to nationalism, tribalism, and exclusion. The second leads to mission, justice, and a church that actually looks more like what we see in Revelation, that multi-ethnic crowd. The table with every tribe, race, and tongue. Now, that's pretty much the lesson in terms of content. And I know I probably repeated a lot of stuff there. I know I did for sure, but that's the beauty of it. When you have less content, we can really kind of drive home that point. So we've still got a couple of minutes. I think it'd be good to. Oh, was I supposed to finish at 9? Sorry, I was working towards 9:30. I had my time messed up. I'm sorry.
All good.
Okay.
You're ahead of your schedule. That's all right.
I was like, cool. So we've got 15 minutes. We could finish up early. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry,
That's
guys.
so funny. No, all good. It's super interesting. So I'm happy.
It's been a long day. My brain is my brain's off.
I mean, because again, I was sort of having been to India briefly, and sort of you come across some of the things there. Talking to Silas and some of the things. I remembered the Dalits. I don't know, Dalit. I'm not sure how you say it. You come across that?
Yeah.
Which is sort of I just looked it up, and then our friends at Wikipedia sort of said it's for those called the untouchables and those who are outside the traditional caste hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Like you thought you're low, but then there's the Dalits below it, and then interesting. They're saying there's like about 200 million of them in India.
It's exactly it.
Yeah, there's huge groups. So.
It's a great analogy to what we're talking about. This is a class of people that are considered by everyone else to be the lowest of the low.
In classical Sanskrit, this means divided, split, broken, scattered.
Wow.
What have
Like
we
that.
just been talking about?
Yeah. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's exactly it. And it's wild that God chooses to start the story with that.
And then I think, then you think about what was the nun over there in India?
Not Magdalene, sorry.
Mother Teresa?
Teresa.
Mother Teresa. And I think that was like, she talked about that was her place where she worked, wasn't it? And the place that nobody else wanted to.
Yes.
And as you say, the elitism says, "Oh, I'm doing good because I'm good, so I can stay here." Whereas, they obviously have done something wrong, so they deserve to be in that space, that whole karma.
Or their ancestors did something wrong.
Yeah.
Or they were born in the wrong place or whatever. It's wild.
That's
And
interesting.
that's the thing, the radicalness of a God showing up, thousands of years ago to this dispossessed people is just as radical today. Yeah, the notion of that. The people that you would least expect God to align himself with.
Yeah.
Which is really subversive and radical and really cool. But look, we're going to build on this over the next 2 lessons as we continue this journey. So I'm so sorry for going over time. I can't believe that.
Right. We'll just make them 2-hour sessions in the future so nobody notices.
That's so funny.
Oh, yeah. Thank God Tash is here. I would have had you here for hours. I'm like, surely we finish at 11.
Well, it's funny when you're saying, well, we're well ahead of schedule, and you sort of 9 o'clock came and went, and I thought, oh, well, whatever. Like, Derek said, it's interesting stuff, so I'll run with it.
Oh, you should have said something, mate. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. If
I'm
Sarah can
surprised
survive,
Tash didn't.
yeah,
I'm blown away.
it's all good. We love you, brother. It's good. That's really cool. I'm just going to try and redo my preconceptions and all the rest of it, reframe it. So, and I imagine that'll build and morph as we go over the next few.
Yeah. And that's the best. This whole thing is a marathon. So it's like, you know what? If you don't think about this until another 2 weeks' time when we meet again, that doesn't matter. Because
So
it just
are we fit or are we unfit?
Oh, no, you're unfit, for sure.
Okay, so that's right. Because I was talking to a guy today and he did a marathon in over 5 hours. So that means we've got 5 hours to cover this off. But if we're really fit, it'd be sort of 2 to 3 hours for the marathon. So it's a lot more compact.
We're super unfit. It's going to be much longer than that. Don't worry about it. Yeah, it builds on it. It's just building blocks.
Yeah.
So let it marinate. It's it'll do its thing. Let the Holy Spirit do its work over the months.
Yeah.
And but it's gonna be good. I appreciate you guys tuning in tonight.
Yeah, man.
Thank you so much.
That's really cool.
That was so good.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's gonna stay cool. Is all I'll say. It's very, very cool. It's gonna be good. I'm excited.
Well done. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you, legends.
Cheers.
I won't take up any more of your time. And go put your feet up, have a scotch or something.
Yeah. Now we can reconvene tomorrow on a different note.
Yes.
Oh, yes, tomorrow night.
If anyone asks you how it was, just say I can't tell you. It's but it was the best thing I've ever experienced in my time.
We were part of the elect, so we can't share it with the Dalits.
Yeah. Just say, look, I know the 4 of us are saved, but I can't speak for anyone else. No, it looks good. Look forward to it. Thank you, guys. Cool. You're legends.
Thank you.